million businesses around the world use MailChimp to send email newsletters. Teams can collaborate with MailChimp to design and track newsletters, or just get work done easier. MailChimp. Send better email. Find out more at MailChimp.com. Hello and welcome to Working, a podcast about what people do all day. I'm David Plotz. What is your name and what do you do?
My name is Nina Kang, and I am a software engineer at Google. That means I write code.
How did you become a software engineer?
I went to college in the mid-90s. The web was just beginning, and I was pre-med, but it turns out I have a pretty bad memory, and I noticed that a bunch of my friends weren't studying for their tests. They had open book tests because they were all computer scientists, and if you can answer the test questions at all, it's considered a win, no matter how many books you're referring to during the exam. That was exciting to me. I had done a little programming in the 80s in BASIC and Logo for fun, completely on my own without much help from teachers. When I saw how much fun they were having, I decided to switch over, and the stuff that I learned in school was kind of fun, but what was really exciting was the web. That was happening while we were there. And actually, a couple of my friends ended up getting involuntarily having to take time away from Harvard to refocus academically before coming back because the web was so exciting. We were staying up all night writing these primitive web pages in HTML. And one of the things that was the most exciting about HTML is that you can teach it to yourself because anytime you go to a web page, the browser has this view source command, and you can look and read what the source code is, and you can copy it straight into your page, and suddenly you've got a copy of that page. Then you can modify it however you want, and that was an opportunity to do self-directed learning on a scale I'd never seen before.
What time do you usually get to work? Do you go to work?
I work in the office Mondays through Thursdays. I drop my daughter off at preschool, so I usually try to get in by 9:10 or so.
And what time do you leave usually?
I leave around 5.
And do you have time when you're messing around and, web surfing the way, say, I do? Or are you just like head in the whole time?
Well, Google gives us so much latitude to design our work lives and the way we're most efficient. So I don't really surf the web very much during work because it doesn't work for me. What I usually do is we have these the pace of coding has a natural rhythm, which is like think, write, hand it off to the computer to run the code, and you pause a little bit while the computer runs the code, and you see what happens, and then you find a problem, then you think, write again. What varies the most among people is what they do during that interval where they've handed off the code to the computer and the computer hasn't done running yet. So some people, blow off steam by going and socializing, like at a physical water cooler or in an internet water cooler, chat board, or they might check their email. And for years, what I've liked to do in those small periods of time is to make very minute clarifying changes to the code base, because my theory is that over a period of years, that builds up into a lot of work.
And is that the minute changes, is that brainless work, or is that actually intellectually demanding?
It's not exactly brainless. It's the stuff you could do in your dreams, but I wouldn't mean that you could do it in your sleep. It might be like there might be something that's been nagging at you because you were working out something on Monday and you noticed that something wasn't quite right. It's not that it's not working properly, it's that it would be more readable or easier to fix.
I guess my question, to ask that a different way, is that meditative work for you?
Yeah, it's absolutely meditative work. It's relaxing, and it gives you that little dopamine hit of having done something.
When you're reading code, is it as clear as if you're reading English?
If I'm reading C++ code, it's clearer because English has ambiguities and C++ is designed to have as few of those as possible. If I were to read Erlang or Prolog, which I'm very much out of the habit of reading, it looks a little bit like Mandarin to me. I have a little reading knowledge of Mandarin. It takes me a couple seconds to process each character. The thing is that I sincerely believe that you, David Plotz, after an 8-hour class would be able to read that code. But in order to learn how to write code, these days you have to be able to Google how various code libraries work and read what other people have written, skim their code, and digest some sort of consensus about what it is that you should be writing. And that's sort of an analog to speed reading that is what you need to learn.
Moving from this reading to writing question, what is it when you're writing code that makes particular code really good?
It depends on the situation and the company. Google is a very collaborative company. There were, almost 1,000 programmers on Google Maps. To my mind, what makes code good is that it is almost anonymous, that you shouldn't be able to read that code and say, oh, Kevin down the hall wrote it. Because if he did, if it's idiosyncratic in that way, it means that it's not something that's going to be so easy for other people to modify. Everyone should write in a uniform enough style within a team that we can easily grasp each other's code and modify it. And there are a couple things that I look for when I'm looking at code. One of the things is how few lines would it take for it to be modified. Code that requires a lot of repetition, some people find that poetic, but I find that tedious because it means you have to modify it in each of the repeated places.
Great word there, poetic. What does that mean when you say some people find it poetic?
Computer programmers pride ourselves on writing elegant code or poetic code, but usually what that means is writing code the way that the individual programmer thinks is good, and that is incredibly subjective. I once worked with a guy who wanted to write code where every line was the same number of characters, and he would name variables in things like, words that you were leaving out vowels from so that his variables could be the same number of characters. But nobody else in the team thought that constituted poetic code. I think that poetic code is code that you can read, and that means that it's the line breaks are in a place that make sense semantically, that there are blank lines between blocks for functional reasons. When something that's going on is not particularly intuitive, then instead of comments, comments in code are pieces of English inserted between special characters that tell the compiler not to read them. And some people rely heavily on comments, but what you find when you're working on a code base that's changing a lot is that people will update the code and not update the comments, so they can be extremely misleading. So what's better than comments is code that what we call self-documenting, where the variable names are clear enough that you can infer what's going on without needing any English.
This episode of Working is sponsored by MailChimp. More than 7 million businesses around the world use MailChimp to send email newsletters. Teams can collaborate with MailChimp to design and track newsletters and just get work done easier. Plus, MailChimp distributes hats for cats and small dogs. You can find out more at MailChimp.com. MailChimp. Send better email. Going back to this question about you talked about you wouldn't want to be able to identify code as having written by Kevin. Will great coders come up with very different solutions to a problem than non-great coders?
Absolutely. Great coders come up with solutions that are usually more concise and more easily verified. I think the key metric is, can someone else read this code and confirm that it works by building a mental model in their head of what the computer is going to do at different steps? There are certain things that are really simple, like finding out how many characters are in a line, that you could write in a way that would confuse everybody. But if your code is well written, people understand what it does and they can tell that it works right away.
So elegance is, to your mind, corresponds with clarity and concision.
Yes, absolutely. Just like English. But
in English, we do pride ourselves, writers. As a writer, I pride myself on having a style that is distinctly my own. Should coders pride themselves on having a style that is distinctly their own, or should they pride themselves on having a style which is so clear that it appears to have no style at all?
I think a mix of both. I think that if you have a style that's distinctly your own for good reasons, that you'll find other people who work with you adopting that style, and your style will abruptly be less individual. And I think that's a sign that your style is good. there are other, literature has certain qualities that good code should never have, like deliberate ambiguity, repetition for rhetorical effect, saying things in a slightly different way when you repeat them. I'm hard pressed to think of why that would be good in a team coding setting.
Are you a reader of literature?
Yeah, I have an MFA in poetry from Warren Wilson.
Oh, that's great. So, do you write poetry?
Yes.
And when you write poetry and when you write code, are you doing the same thing?
My poetry is actually weakened by my coding style. And there's certain poetic devices that I have a lot of trouble with using, that I have to deliberately try to force myself to use because they would make for bad coding style. Rhetorical questions, repetition, rhyme, convoluted syntax. It's so important in poetry to be able to surprise the reader. And in coding, you can surprise the reader for good effect, but you want to do it through new clarity and new concision. And in poetry, the range of emotions you want to give the reader is so much wider than that.
Have you ever read a poet and thought, this is like great code?
Never. I've never read a good poet and thought that.
So you're talking about the writing. We're talking about sort of about the style of it. When you're trying to solve a problem in code, how much of it is the actual writing and how much of it is figuring out logically what the problem is and the kind of questions to ask to get it? So how much of it is, I guess, the algorithm, and how much of it is the execution, the writing of it?
That's an extremely important question. I think that for a good coder, you're going to spend more than half your time figuring out the best way to do something. And the amount of time you spend writing what the final answer is should be like 10% or something tiny. I think a lot of us go through various drafts, various implementations. You might try a specific way of writing it, and then you look at what you've typed, and it's just too long, too hard for someone to understand. But having written it gives you insight into how you might revise it to make it more readable.
What do you think you would be doing if you weren't a coder?
Well, I actually took 3 months off, and I wrote an article for Salon. I found writing essays pretty rewarding, but not as rewarding as coding. It was just so open-ended, and you don't have that sort of tight collaboration with the computer to validate you. And I did a little yoga, and I did gardening. Now, pruning and weeding is a lot like coding, especially maintenance coding in a company like Google. I have this grapevine, and it's sending out tendrils very aggressively. And the way the vine works is, it might have 3 different stalks. Each stalk is sending out tendrils almost at random. The tendrils are twining on each other. And even though the vine stalks don't need each other for support, they've ended up in this sort of tightly nested space. And that's actually something that can happen to code, especially in a company as big as Google. You don't want to write this one function. You'll see that someone else on the other team on another team wrote a function just like that, and you go send out, a reference, and you link in that function into your own code. Now, the other person wants to change their function, and suddenly they're stuck. They can't change it too much without changing your code too, and now they have a pickle. The process of untwining those little tendrils and chopping down my stalks felt a lot like what I have to do to decrease other people's reliance on my code sometimes.
So you're a woman and you're a software developer. Do you think there is any way, you obviously work differently than other people because you are a different person than other people. Do you think the fact that you're a woman has any relevance to thinking about how you work differently or how your working style or what you're good at?
I don't think there's anything in me that makes me different from a male programmer. I do think people relate to me differently because I'm a woman. But one example would be, especially now that I'm a mother, one role that people feel very comfortable. Women leaders need to be in certain slots for people to feel comfortable, and one of those roles is the maternal role. So if I am going around asking people, have you done your work yet? And I'm doing it in a way that they can see as motherly, it's more comfortable than as, some young woman trying to nag them. Another thing is that there's sort of an expectation that women will be better at collaborative tasks, at mentoring, at documenting and explaining things. And there certainly have been times in my career when I was good at those tasks, and there'd be other, year periods where I was in a more solitary mode for whatever reason. And definitely, I think people can relate to me like they understand me better when I'm slotting into those sort of pink skills a little more clearly.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Working. On the next show, I'm going to talk to Andrew Rubin, who's a principal of a KIPP school, a really interesting, successful charter school in Houston.
Well, that's the end of the episode. I think it's too short. I should have gone into more detail about working at Google. Just next up, we're going to do a How Does a Farmer Work episode from the podcast Slate's Working.
Working is supported by MailChimp. More than 7 million businesses around the world use MailChimp to send email newsletters. Teams can collaborate with MailChimp to design and track newsletters, or just get work done easier. MailChimp. Send better email. Find out more at MailChimp.com. Hello and welcome to Working, a podcast about what people do all day. I'm David Plotz. What is your name and what do you do?
Eddie.
I think the problem with the Google episode was they're supposed to talk about what they do during the day, but she was just talking about like the theory of coding, like she was giving a lecture on coding, but she wasn't just talking about what she did on an average day. Podcast is called Working. The description is: Working explains the world of the software engineer, our quest to write good code and good poetry. But the podcast is supposed to be about what they do on an average day. Oh well.
Eddie Rankin. I'm a fruit grower in Ortana, Pennsylvania.
What's the name of your farm?
The farm's Twin Springs Fruit Farm.
And how big is the farm and how long have you been a farmer?
The farm's approximately 100 acres in size, mostly apples and peaches, but a lot of vegetables as well. We've been in business since 1980. We direct retail everything we grow in the Washington, D.C. area.
Just briefly, because people will hear this in your voice, you're not American. How is it that you, an Irishman, are a farmer in rural Pennsylvania?
Sheer accident. I'm not from a farming background, but I arrived in Adams County, in this area, way back in 1974 and fell in love not only with the beauty of it, but with the art of growing apples. It just fascinated me from the start, and I never looked back.
Tell us what you farm and then what you do with it and how you make money from it.
We grow apples, peaches, pears, plums, nectarines, cherries, apricots, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries. We have approximately 35,000 square feet of greenhouses that grow tomatoes, cucumbers, arugula, lettuce, basil, eggplant, and peppers at this stage. And then we have approximately 15 acres of vegetables outside. We grow everything from tomatoes, potatoes, garlic, onions, winter squash, Brussels sprouts, peas. Oh, I'm missing things. I know there's more.
And then how does that become a business?
Basically, we sell everything that we grow at farmers markets. We do farmers markets that are run by Extension Services, and we sometimes set up farmers markets where we're the only people there selling our produce. Being the only person there means that it gives you the option to be able to sell other people's produce. Most farmers markets you can only sell what you grow. It's really hard to grow everything. It's actually really hard to grow all the stuff we do right now. It feels like everything, but there's always products that we just aren't able to grow in this location. We started doing those markets way back in 1980. One of my partners read an article in the Washington Post that said that they were looking for vendors for a farmers market at RFK Stadium. And we ended going to that, and it was highly successful. In fact, it was so much fun to do it. It wasn't work, and we were there from 7 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night. But that's what got us started. We did 3 markets, I think, the second year, probably 5 different markets the third, and so on and so on. Now we're up to 18 different locations in the greater Washington area.
What do you think the key difference between being a farmer, a small farmer who sells directly to urban consumers, is from being a farmer whose basic dealings are with ConAgra, or who works at a giant farm out in the Midwest somewhere, who isn't selling to consumers and is basically dealing with a huge agricultural economy?
In comparison to, say, corn growers, who are growing thousands of acres, we've got 100 acres, so we have to be much more intensive to make a living on this farm. I mean, the reason we're growing a lot of these crops is because customers tell us what they want. If it works for us, we grow it. If not, someone else does. It makes for it's a very different model. This doesn't really work for very large farms because their production levels are so high that the amount that we sell is a drop in the bucket. For example, we grow about 10,000 bushels of apples a year, approximately. One of my neighbors around here picks about 10,000 bushels per day during apple season because they've got 500 acres. Different market that they're selling to, and their idea is to do it on volume. We get a better return per bushel than they do, but they make it up with high volume.
Let's talk about apples, because that is what brought you into this. So walk us through a day. I mean, maybe there is no typical day of dealing with an apple, dealing with your orchard, but try to find a typical day.
This will probably be a mixture of 4 or 5 days, but almost to describe it as a typical week, and I'll make it a little smaller. First thing in the morning when I get up, I'm having my breakfast, and I go online and look at emails. I have a weather forecasting service for the farm, which will tell me humidity, temperatures, wind speed, chances of rain, what the percentage chance of rain is, all that sort of information.
Wait, so you have literally a service that you pay for just for the farm? How does that work?
The company that we use is called Skybit, and they're out of State College. That's the town where Penn State is, which is a famous meteorological school. They also provide us with another service, which is to do with the major pests that can affect my crop, such as oriental fruit moth, codling moth, tufted apple budworm, and of course right now the dreadful brown marmorated stink bug. Penn State Fruit Research Lab is very close to where I farm here. It's about 10 miles away, and the entomologists there have worked out, this has been developed all over the United States, the ability to monitor when the hatch occurs of different bugs, and therefore be able to specifically say when they're hatching and when they need to be taken care of. That's a very useful tool, and from Skybit they also send out information on insects. That's the one I use mostly. They also send out information on fungus diseases because here on the east coast of the United States we are basically growing crops in a temperate rainforest area, so we have a lot of fungus diseases and things that have to be taken care of.
So I interrupted you. You were just doing the first thing of your day. So let's go back. So you checked your email. All right.
Yeah. Okay. Now it's 5:31 in the morning. I live 10 miles off the farm in Gettysburg. So I just run up here. No traffic jams. It's very nice. I used to make these gigantic lists of all the things we would do so I could go and talk to my farm manager and see how we were going to do things. And of course, I arrive in here at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and already something's happened and everything's changed. And, oh no, we have to go and pick blueberries because the birds are getting at them, or we need to pick some peaches. I've sort of given up on trying to micromanage. You basically know a lot of the different things you're going to have to do, but you never know quite which day it's going to be. For example, when we have, say codling moth is about to hatch, you then can plan at a certain number of percentage of the hatch is when is the best time to go out and use an insecticide to deal with that. And normally, it's, in old-fashioned times, by old-fashioned I mean 20 years ago, you were basically spraying by the week trying to cover it because you never quite knew when that bug was there. You knew it was there between, for a period of 3 weeks, so you'd put on 3 sprays. By using the forecasting systems, we can tell exactly when we can spray and do it with maybe 2 sprays, or if we're lucky, even 1 for different types of pests. Our farm is a farm that uses integrated pest management. Virtually every farm in the fruit industry is heavily involved in IPM, and I can really only speak to that. That's an area that I know something about. It's so totally different than people's image of spraying trees that it's Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. That just doesn't occur anymore. I mean, and the materials are becoming what are known in the business as softer. In other words, they're specifically targeted to a specific bug. Things like DDT were long gone before I even got into the business.
Back to your day.
Well, after having talked to Arturo about what we're going to do, it could involve going out picking fruit, whether it's strawberries the start of the season. Right now we're starting to pick blueberries, and we look to have a very good crop. We're very excited about that. Those are things that can take up most of the morning. And while that's going on, I'm not necessarily with the guys all the time. I used to be when this was a much smaller farm, but it's got so intensive that we divide the crews up and people are doing different tasks. Like on a Monday morning is my day for going around and checking all the traps that I have hanging out in the trees, which help to tell me what the populations of different bugs are. That's another of the ways we can see a buildup, and there are, for example, these are traps that have a pheromone lure that will draw the bugs in, and there's a sticky sheet there that they stick to, so I can take that out, look and count the number of bugs that are the ones that are a potential threat. And there are thresholds set for the number that you would count in a trap. As long as we don't